Welcome to Warhammer 40k lore in the Bible, where I pull from Warhammer 40k lore to help explain biblical lore. And today I'm going to be reacting to KrakDuk's Craftworld Eldar, the most impactful faction, really. I also do a Warhammer 40k lore in the Bible lore series every Monday, and every Tuesday is the short version of that, which is more of a narrative experience. And then I also do these react videos with a biblical veneer to it as well. So, let's go ahead and get this started. All right.
This video is sponsored by Incogni. Hi friends, today we're going to be talking about the single most successful species in the entire 40k universe. Sure, they've hit some rough times and haven't been doing so hot lately, but who hasn't had their hiccups? Plus, despite being one of the key factions in the setting and having perhaps the biggest impact on the setting, these dudes are still a pretty underrated and neglected faction. So, you can be both a pompous elite who's better than everyone while still somehow being an underdog. Today, we're talking about the Craftworld Eldar and...
All right. So what if I told you there may be elves in the Bible? And of course, it comes from Genesis 6, where angels came down, mated with women. And then Joshua 4 also talks about how men created, different species or the mixture of animals. And they would mix a lion with a bird or whatever, right? So there was some crazy stuff going on back then, which is why God sent the flood. But this is interesting. And they were also afterwards, it says in Genesis 6. So let me find it. So, where is he? No, right here. Proverbs 30, starting in verse 11. So there is a generation that curseth their father and doth not bless their mother. There is a generation that are pure in their own eyes and yet not washed from their filthiness. Here is where it starts getting a little crazy here. There is a generation, oh how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up, like an elf's, right? Our eyes are kind of like straightforward, whatever, but when you see elves, they're a little lifted up and bigger, right? And this goes also into vampires as well, right? So there was a generation whose teeth are as swords, and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men. Okay, let's keep going here. Verse 15. The horse leech had 2 daughters, crying, Give, give. There are 3 things that are never satisfied, yea, 4 things say not, it is enough. And what do leeches do? Yes. They drink blood, right? That's what's referencing there. So, very interesting. But anyways, we're going to be talking about the New Jerusalem as well with the Craftworld.
Who can resist Power Ranger ultra advanced ninja dudes with ghost robots? Well, apparently a lot of people, but forget that. Today, we like the elves. And before talking about those funky Craftworlders, we gotta discuss the Eldar race as a whole. But first, speaking of dying empires, you know what empire's dying for me? The empire of annoying scam likely calls has been in shambles since I started using Incogni. That's right, this video is sponsored by Incogni. Beyond annoying spam calls, data brokers can be quite dangerous. Malicious ones.
So there you guys go. If you want to check out that, so I guess I should explain this. I don't necessarily like putting ads and stuff like that from other channels. It gets you guys to go to their video and stuff like that, but also I don't want to put my name on what may be a scam or is looking at your and selling your data or whatever it is, because I don't know. So if you want to go check it out, go check out his original video, and it'll be in the description as well. And I don't mean to disrespect them or anything like that. And plus, you guys also don't like seeing the ads anyways. You guys complain about it, so there we go.
Old ones in the war in heaven. to wage war in heaven against the Necron menace. Since the old ones were getting their gobsmacked, they created a bunch of species to use like Pokemon against the stupid skeletons. And just like Pokemon, there's a physical and special attack
Gotta
split.
catch 'em all.
Where the Kroaks were incredibly powerful and imposing soldiers, the Eldar were extremely potent psykers. The War in Heaven era Eldar were probably the most powerful psykers the universe has ever seen as they went toe-to-toe with gods. Despite the Eldar's incredible sorcery, the Necrons were able to vanquish the Old Ones. However, after destroying the Old Ones and shattering the Catan, the Necrons had to go into the Great Sleep in order to evade the Eldar. Although the Necrons had won the war, the Eldar had become so powerful that the Necrons couldn't possibly hope to defeat them in their war-torn state. So, with the Necrons, Old Ones, and Catan,
Something that's pretty cool, like when you look into the word orcs, right? It comes from or at least ours, comes from the word orkneus, which basically means undead demon or undead corpse, right? We talk about the Rephaim on this channel a lot, which means the undead giants, right? Aga Bashan says he was the last of the Rephaim. It says giant there, but the word is Rephaim. And these were probably like giants that were before the flood and then came. We have Job, which says dead things are formed from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof. Stuff like that, right? So that's a little interesting tidbit about orcs, right? Now, they're not undead in the Warhammer 40k universe. They're fungus and stuff, but still, just something a little interesting there.
and gone, the Eldar culled the Korks and took dominion of the galaxy, becoming the most advanced society ever. The Eldar was the most powerful and longest lasting empire in the entire setting. Think about it. The current dominant race in the galaxy, humanity, has been around for about 340,000-ish years, whereas
Also, guys, it also comes from Orcus, which is the Roman god of the underworld. So, there you go. Sorry.
the Eldar Empire lasted for around 60 million years. And keep in mind, humanity has had a multitude of different empires and governments throughout. Even the Imperium and Dark Age of technology mankind pales in comparison to the lifespan of the Eldar Empire. The Eldar Empire was incredibly technologically advanced, wholly unmatched in military might, and extremely expansive. Immune to disease, unthreatened by external threat, and far beyond conventional societal struggles, the Eldar became bored and unfulfilled in life. So
something interesting, you see like a lot of elves and elf stuff. They're like 1,000, 2,000 years old and stuff like that. This is probably a product of, because remember, Adam, he lived to be like 900 years old, right? And this does seem to be a thing back in, the antiquity, which is pre-flood and stuff like that. And I'd say before that, because I believe in what is called the gap theory, but we won't get into that. But anyways, I lost my train of thought, so here we go.
real quick, let me do a little aside on Eldar biology. The Eldar are quite literally built differently. They may look like humans, but they are extremely elegant, superficially perfect, and they're also supernaturally fast, have ungodly reflexes, and possess an incomprehensibly deep range of emotions and senses. And are all
Yeah, you see that in that Proverbs verse where it says here, there's a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. So there you go. Very interesting.
very psychically attuned. They are so much more refined than humans that they're said to perceive humanity in almost slow motion and find them very awkward. They even felt that way after looking at the
Monkey.
non-meat humans as well. And on the other end, humans tend to find
The
the Eldar
monkeys.
unsettling or uncanny because of the way they move and talk. But most importantly, the Eldar are freaky little fellas who have emotions and passions far, far more extreme than humans, not to mention their virtual immortality. So, with every corporeal problem solved, their curiosity got the best of them, and they began to explore more and more esoteric fields and doing, let's just say
Stuff.
weird things. Thus, the noble values and altruistic pursuits that once defined the Empire were largely abandoned for some crazy ass things. And this is where the Craftworld Eldar finally appear in their own video. The Craftworlders were societies of traders who lived aboard trading ships known as Craftworlds, and these are your typical clog and canal trading ships. The Craftworlds were humongous continent to planetoid sized ships that could house entire cities of Eldar. The Craftworld Eldar would go across the galaxy on trading missions and only return to the central Eldar Empire a few times every 1,000 or so years. Due to them rarely interacting with the greater Eldar Empire, they saw the race's fall to degeneracy more clearly and became increasingly independent of the Eldar Empire.
So now, this is where we get into the New Jerusalem. So I want you guys to take off that medieval thinking of how God works, right? Because, in my opinion, He created us, right? And everything that has been created by Him comes from Him, right? So the technology, whatever it is, right? He's seen it, He has it, per se, right? So we're going to see the New Jerusalem. It's descending. So it can descend, it could probably ascend. And we'll see in the book of Enoch that he sees the path of the stars in the ceiling. And anyways, we'll get into that when we get into that. So right here. So Revelation 21:2, starting in verse 2. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Okay. Let me find it. Okay. And he carried me away, verse 10, and he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, like a jasper stone, clear and crystal. One thing about Craftworlds is they're not made from crystal, but crystalline wraith bone. So, anyways. And it had a great and high wall, and it had 12 gates, and the gates 12 angels, names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Now, these gates are portals. And we'll see that here. Let's go to the book of Enoch real quick. So start with verse 8. And the vision was shown to me. First Enoch chapter 14, verse 8. And the vision was shown to me thus. Behold, in the vision, clouds invited me, and a mist summoned me. So we see, like in the Bible, when God comes, whatever, it's like in a whirlwind. He took Enoch up in a whirlwind, right? Oh, lost my train. Where is it? Right here. And the mist summoned me. And the course of the stars and lightning sped and hastened me. So think of Star Wars, right? When they're going into warp speed, all of a sudden, the stars and all that go fast, faster and faster, right? As he's speeding through. And the winds in the vision caused me to fly and lifted me upward and bore me into heaven. And I went and I drew nigh to a wall which was built of crystals, surrounded by tongues of fire. And it began to affright me. And I went into the tongues of fire and drew nigh to a large house which was built of crystals. Okay. And the walls of the house were like tessellated floor made of crystals, and the groundwork was of crystals. So, these are portals, right? These aren't just iron gates and stuff like that. These are actual portals, right? Anyways, let's keep this going.
Even having the foresight to prepare for an inevitable collapse in society. And so, eventually, the Eldar's degeneracy hit a tipping point, and the combination of the Eldar's degenerate ways, extreme emotions, and psychic might gave birth to the Prince of Pleasure, God of Excess, Slaanesh. In an instant, billions of Eldar were annihilated, their gods killed, other than a few, and their souls being devoured by Slaanesh. And only a tiny population in Eldar were able to survive. most of those being the Craftworld Eldar and the Exodites. And even then, only the most remote Craftworlders and Exodites were spared as the psychic cataclysm was just so intense. This left the Eldar population ravaged and essentially doomed the race since their reproduction was very slow, their souls are damned, and the once harmless threats of the galaxy became quite harmful and threatening all of a sudden. Which, also, I'm not an elf simp or anything, but it does irk me when people blame the Craftworld Eldar for birthing Slanesh. They were like the 0.01% of Eldar who weren't filthy degenerates who ruined the world. But anyways, after the death of the Eldar Empire, humanity was primed to take the galaxy, and then the Craftworlders became dead set on preserving their dying race by keeping their traditions and themselves alive. In the present time, the Craftworlders continue to travel the stars, always on the defensive from Slanesh and the opportunistic threats of the galaxy. Some measures that the Eldar take in order to evade Slanesh are Spirit Stones and their Path system. So, let's go over those measures real quick. Firstly, Soul Stones are the little gems that Eldar wear and adorn their tech with, and they gotta wear these because after the birth of Slanesh,
There's something crazy about crystals that you see in a lot of cult stuff and pagan stuff is that they use these crystals for the rituals, and it's like a lot of it seems to power stuff. You see this in RPGs, right? You see this in like Elder Scrolls and petty soul gems, and or not, they're called soul gems, but but anyways, you get the gist. So there's something with crystals. We see the New Jerusalem. It's like crystalline everywhere and all that. Could that be something with power and energy and stuff like that? I don't know. Very interesting.
all Eldar souls get devoured by Slanesh if no other measures are taken. So, Spirit Stones essentially capture Eldar souls before they can be eaten, and they're put into the Craftworld Infinity Circuit, which is like a big old soul piggy bank. In addition, Eldar souls from the Infinity Circuit can be taken and put into the coolest Eldar thing ever, the Wraith Constructs. However, most of the time this leaves the warrior in a haze and they need guidance of a Spirit Seer to function. Anyways, though, the other way they keep from having the devil eat their soul is by partaking in the mystical and archaic practice of having a fucking hobby. Much like how humans without a hobby fall to doom scrolling and jorking it all day, Eldar without a hobby tend to fall to sadistic murder parties and literal apocalypse level degeneracy. So
they're basically birthing Slanesh, watching their screens, we'll just say.
They have this thing called the Azariani Path System in order to prevent this. Due to the Eldar's tendency towards the extremes and natural desire for powerful sensations, they channel their inner angst towards a goal. Whoa! Breaking news!
What?
After 60 million years, Ultra Mega Race discovers that having a goal in life is a good thing. Joking aside,
Facts.
though, these goals aren't quite like normal human goals, such as buying a house, getting a stable job, having more than 2 friends. No, Eldar goals are realistic. Just kidding, or maybe not. But anyways, Eldar paths, like literally everything else they do, is incredibly extreme and crazy to anyone who isn't virtually immortal. All Craftworld Eldar pick a path and then wholly dedicate themselves to that path. They set out to completely master whatever path they chose, and this theoretically distracts them from their dangerous urges. And these paths can be basically
That'd be nice if we have trade schools, which is nice. But if I think people were born for a certain thing, if you know what I mean, they're good at something, right? None of us are good at everything, and there's some people that are better at, let's say, coding or building stuff or whatever, Have somebody that was born that loves that is really good at, then have them focus on that. You still learn math, reading, stuff like that, but you tailor a curriculum around that, and then you send them off that kind of schooling, but you still keep the reading, writing, history, stuff like that, right? But have it tailored to that. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyways, I digress.
anything from passive gardening or something stupid to perhaps the most famous path of the warrior that the aspect warriors partake in. And an Eldar can change their path whenever they deem necessary or whenever they feel like they've learned as much as they could from that path. Although they
So
abandon
basically, a college student who changes their major every other year.
in their past paths, the experiences on the paths enrich their spirit and helped expand their minds even further for their future endeavors. Alternatively, if they get too immersed in their path, they may be lost on the path and unable to do anything but whatever their path is. But back to the warrior path thing, those on the path of the warrior are the aspect warriors, and they are one of the most, if not the most, elite warriors in the entire setting. Honestly, I'd say in general, the aspect warriors are the most elite warriors in the setting, with only really the custodies or other Eldar factions coming close.
All right, so I want to get into more about the craft worlds, right? So we know the craft worlds, they have the webway portal, right? That's why I'm talking about this wall of portals in the New Jerusalem. Now, the next thing is there's mansions here. People will be living in this. And we'll see first, let me bring up this. In the first book of Enoch, we're going to see the path of the stars in the ceiling, he says. So let me find it. So its ceiling, or verse 11, its ceiling was like the path of the stars and the lightnings, and between them were fiery cherubim, and their heaven was as clear as water. A flaming fire surrounded the walls, and its portals blazed with fire. So it says they're portals, right? They're not like regular gates as we think of gates, right? Okay, and I entered into the house, and it was hot as fire and cold as ice, and there were no delights of life therein. Fear covered me, and trembling. So, and as I quaked and trembled, I fell upon my face and beheld a vision, and lo, there was a second house greater than the former, and the entire portal stood open before me, and it was built of flames of fire. In every aspect, it was so excellent in splendor, magnificent in extent, that I could not describe to you its splendor and its extent. And the floor was of fire, and above it were lightnings, and the path of the stars, and its ceiling was as a flame of fire. And I looked and saw therein a lofty throne, and its appearance as crystal, and the wheels thereof are like as the shining shut. These wheels are what are called the Ophana. These are actual entities, the wheel within a wheel. And in my opinion, these are like the orbs that you see a lot, right? Because when you look closely, you'll see like stuff going like this around it and whatever, or within it, and they glow, right? That's what it's saying here. But anyways, and then we see this throne. Is this the bridge of the New Jerusalem where God lives, right? It's very interesting. And then we see the ceiling. It's got the path of the stars and fire and whatnot. Is this like a map thing? I don't know, but it's very interesting. But anyways, let me finish with this. John 14:2. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye also may be. So, there's mansions, and this New Jerusalem is livable. It can be out, in heaven, let's just say, so right there, and people can live in it. But then it also descends into the earth and can be a city, right? And it's going to be closed off mostly to, God's people, basically, right? But there's a whole story behind that. There may be a new creation. I don't know. But anyways, I digress.
Take note, I said most elite, not most powerful. Marines and orcs have more brute force and durability, and there's some other big boy threats out there, but in terms of sheer skill, the Eldar elites are largely unmatched. But anyways, another prominent warrior for the Eldar are, of course, their Psykers. They have
Psykers, There's some interesting things, but I'll save that for another video.
Are supposed to have the most powerful psychers of all the main factions. Although they're far weaker than their War in Heaven counterparts and can't unleash their full might lest they get their souls eaten or they turn into crystals or whatever, the Eldar Seers are still a very deadly force and are some of the most powerful individual units in the setting. And then finally, in these dire times, every Eldar is trained in combat, meaning that even Craftworld civilians must take up arms to defend their dying race from the myriad threats of the galaxy. Thus, the most numerous Eldar military force, the Guardians, are a militia. But them being civilians doesn't mean they're weak. Even though they're technically civilians, the Eldar Guardians are still on par with most factions' elite warriors, if not better, simply due to the Eldars' long lives and biology. The Guardians are split.
Yeah, there's stories of villagers, medieval times, ancient China, who were regular civilians, but they all were trained in combat. And they pretty much had to be because you had to have walls back then. If you didn't have walls, man, you better have everybody able to fight because they was going to be raided. But anyways.
Into two main groups, those being the Guardian Defenders and the Storm Guardians. These are basically just ranged versus melee, with the Defenders using shuriken catapults and heavier weapons, while Storm Guardians use chain swords and shuriken pistols. Speaking of shuriken weapons, though, quickly for Eldar gear, their most common weapon is that of the shuriken variety, and these funky guns shoot razor-sharp monomolecular discs at their enemies. The extreme velocity and impossible sharpness means that they can easily rend flesh and penetrate armor relative to comparable weapons of other factions. Also, fun fact, the magazine of the gun is actually a solid piece of wraith bone that the catapult basically cuts up into discs and shoots out. And then another fun fact, these little tube thingies interface the gun to their armor so they can aim better. But anyways, speaking of armor, the standard Eldar armor is their mesh armor. These are psychic bodysuits that feel like conventional cloth when wearing, but harden when impacted. This means it's very protective while also offering unrivaled mobility and lightness. The mesh armor can also be fitted with psychoplastic plates for even better protection at the cost of a little bit of weight. But even the heaviest of Eldar armor is far lighter than their contemporaries. This plays well into their fast and furious hit-and-run fighting style. Which, speaking of, the Eldar tend to employ a fast and furious hit-and-run fighting style. This makes a lot of sense as they're already the fastest race, but also because they must minimize casualties due to the thirst god and their dwindling population, so they really play into the glass cannon build. Expanding on that, the Eldar generally try to avoid conflict altogether and use their Farseers to try and prevent conflicts that threaten them. This has varying degrees of success since they seemingly only talk like they overdosed on brain max, and it usually goes something like this. I don't speak Italian, stupid. Gulp. How could anyone have foreseen this tragedy? Imagine dying noises now. But also, something very interesting with the Eldar warriors is that since they possess such powerful emotions, they actually feel extremely bad about killing. Unless they deem their victims to be mindless pests like orc or tyranids, they do feel really bad. People often say that the Eldar view all other species as lesser beings for the slaughter, but it's not really that simple. Most Eldar actually sympathize with humans since they kind of see themselves in humanity, or at least feel pity towards them. So, when fighting humans, Tau, or other
some reason that just reminds me of Mr. T. I pity the fool. I don't know why. Anyways, I digress.
Sentient beings, the Eldar must put on a metaphorical war mask to cope with the negative emotions of murder. Otherwise, they'll likely go insane with despair or bloodlust. But anyways, on that cool, awesome note, that was a Craftworld Eldar, and admittedly, I'm not the biggest Eldar fan, but they are a cool faction, and I do feel like they are quite underrated. For some reason, it seems that everyone but Eldar fans hate Eldar, and they tend to get neglected, and I'm part of those who neglect the faction, but they are a core faction, and lore-wise, they're probably the most important faction in the setting, other than perhaps the Imperium. And to be honest, it's probably a combination of the bad writing and how pretentious and stupid they can come off in 40k stories. Or maybe people just don't like the Coneheads and they think they look stupid. That's the reason I didn't like the Eldar at first. I've come around to the look, but it legitimately did stop me from considering them as a faction to collect. But anyways, I'll probably make some...
I always kind of liked the Eldar. Now they're not my favorite faction or whatever. I would say the Imperium or the Salamanders is my favorite. And then I would go with like a Xenos would be the Necrons. And then, of course, my Chaos would be the Death Guard. So, anyways.
More Eldar videos eventually. Definitely for the other sub factions, but probably for specific craft worlds, and then maybe for things like Wraithbone, even though it's apparently just a rock now and not really special. I'd also like to talk about Wraith constructs, weapons, and the fabled Aspect Warriors Part 2. Everyone go watch my Aspect Warriors Part 1. But anyways, let me know what you think about the Eldar and what's your favorite Eldar sub-faction. I personally like the craft rolls the most, but the clowns are funny too, I suppose. Anyways, thank you for watching, and big thanks to the patrons who support the channel.
We're going to wind it down here. I want to thank everybody who liked the video. If you disliked the video, thank you for at least giving me a chance. I also want to promote my memberships, only $5 a month. And there will be extra videos for the members. It'll be Q&As, gaming videos with you guys, and just conversations or whatever, whatever we can think of. Also, there'll be a free portion of the Discord, but also a members portion of the Discord. And I also want to start bringing in Christian Warhammer fans so they can get together and on the Discord and Bible study or whatever, right? So I want this to be a community, and a good community, and I don't want to segregate, my community so that one only gets the Discord or whatever. So there will be free version, the free Discord or whatever, and then there'll be a portion of that Discord that will be just for the members, and they only have access to. But anyways, I want to thank everybody, and you guys have a wonderful day.